When EOC 2.0 dropped, I went ahead and made an initial DPS video showcasing what had changed with the abilities and giving you some rough rotations to use in your adventures. And a few things have changed here and there with the updates over the past few Mondays, so I wanted to do an update video here for you guys on the rotations that I've recently been using. Now yes, I was on a pretty consistent schedule for uploading videos, but then I decided to join a bingo, and that's why I haven't made a video in the past week or so. But that bingo is over and done with. It was the grind to win bingo, and our team happened to win. And it also gave me time to refine rotations a little bit on a few different places, so some guides coming out in the near future will be pretty good. Go ahead and keep your eyes out for those. Anyways, you guys are here for rotations, and keeping with the last video, we'll go ahead and start with melee. Now melee overall, I believe it was a week after release, it got a damage nerf, and this was very needed for the style. I think it needs to be nerfed more, but that is a topic for a different time or over on my stream on Twitch. And they basically just toned down some of the damage values, but they didn't really change anything with cooldowns or anything like that. So the old rotation works, but when I was watching it back, it was definitely not the most ideal rotation. And I'll go ahead and bring the rotation that I've actually been using for quite a while now anytime I use a berserk, and this is a rough example. I will improv things here and there with this rotation. For instance, if it's the first Zerk, I will not be using easy K-spec where it shows. I will just stall easy K-spec and then release with meteor strike at the start of a boss. And in place of the easy K, sometimes I use a hurricane there, because chaos or hurricane, if you have bloodlust stacks, actually is pretty strong. Or if you want to throw in a mercy dagger EOF, you can go ahead and do that there. But overall, that is pretty much what I have been using so far. Gear wise and ability wise, nothing has really changed. I just kind of have some basic stuff here for melee, like D-backs, my easy K, my Lings. I'm still using a full scripture. I'm still keeping the same perk setup. I went ahead and put energizing 2 with ultimatums 4 because I'm not really doing anything like Vorkath or Karapak anymore. I've essentially retired both of those bosses, so I don't really need genocide. And the energizing 2 does make things like Nakatra or a Masket a little bit nicer. And speaking of perks, something we got somewhat recently and has been a point of discussion for perk setups is the Equilibrium perk. And as far as I'm aware with melee, unless you have basically every single damage buff under the sun, it's not really worthwhile to run Equilibrium, especially if you're able to run Eclipse Soul and get the extra 4% crit chance, which most places I use melee or mage melee hybrid. Most of the time I'm able to get away with using the prayers over the curses. That setup in general is going to be stronger because outside of overpower, your assaults, your greater flurries, your rends, your adaptive strikes, your barges, hurricanes, all of these different abilities are never really going to get close to hit cap. Even if you're using something like a Karis, I even think with a DBA in Karis, you're not gonna quite get there. And being able to use the dagger EOF is also very useful, and the dagger EOF essentially turns to garbage as soon as you try and use Equilibrium with it. In the range section, I'll probably bring this up again, but there are certain instances with bosses like Vorkath or a Masket where Equilibrium on the range side of things, just because of how those bosses work out. Vorkath being you have every damage buff under the sun imaginable to where you're just hitting 30Ks anyways, and a Masket not having to use rapid fire inside of the room since we now have the mobile death swiftness and whatnot. These are the two that I can think of where Equilibrium is better in terms of sacrificing a bit of damage on melee to make the range parts of those fights significantly better. But if you're just melee camping or using like a mage melee bridge setup, or you just don't want to deal with extra tops that have the same exact item ID, but they have different perks on them. Yes, the presets can pull different items. They can differentiate them with exact matching, but it is still annoying in my opinion, so it is what it is. Personally, I'm not going to bother with equilibrium on any setup, but that's just me. You can do whatever your heart desires. And I'll just go ahead and do an example of this berserk rotation here. We'll just get all potioned up and whatnot. We have adrenaline, and I'll just pretend this dummy here is the boss in question. Pick whichever boss you would want to start with a Zerk and just pretend that this dummy is that boss. And what that would look like is we would stall an easy K spec on this combat dummy while we're here at the adren crystal, go ahead and get our adrenaline. And something nice now is that you can surge with something stalled as well as escape, and their cooldowns are not shared at all, so that is something nice you can do while stalling. But then what we would do is target cycle release with meteor strike, hit our divert, and then go ahead and berserk. We'll barge and then hit an overpower, switch to our dual wields, hit greater flurry, swap back to easy K, and use an assault and let it play out. Then go for a rend, another overpower, and then another assault. And then here I'm going to Chaos Roar and just hit a Hurricane. Then an Overpower, a Rend, a 2-hit Assault. I goofed it up a little bit here, but we'll go ahead and Greater Flurry into our final Overpower and call it good. And then just kind of improv from there. I did go a little bit against the grain on that rotation that I showed on screen, but it was still good damage. For some reason, I thought I didn't have my EOF in the preset. We'll just call this, it's midnight when I decided to record this, so we'll just give myself the pass there. And that's why I used Hurricane instead of an EOF. I believe a Chaos Roar Dagger is still better than a Chaos Roar Hurricane, although say you might want the extra adrenaline for something you're going to do afterwards, you could consider using Hurricane in place of Dagger because it does cost a bit less, but that would definitely be a more individual case by case thing to decide. But without me yapping a whole lot longer, let's just go ahead and look at the next combat style. Alrighty, I have some ranged gear here, and the only thing I want to talk about is how I'm really incorporating when arrows now and how I'm really building up arrow stacks in order to get into DS and whatnot. Because when arrows from the initial release, they did get a buff. They are now 30% damage again and only require 10 stacks to build up. And depending on what I'm doing, say I'm just range camping something, I will go ahead and sometimes build up arrow stacks here on this dummy and then carry them into the boss. If I'm doing some type of hybrid, I'll probably just start with the other combat style that I'm bringing and then just do something like piercing shot, greater ricochet, and then another piercing shot to get my death spore stacks, and then just go into a DS from there. Since we don't have when sporing as a thing anymore, it is kind of annoying to build up 22 stacks worth of arrows just to go ahead and start a death swiftness rotation, because death spores themselves require 12 stacks to get the proc, and then when arrows are an additional 10 stacks. So if you want to build them up on a dummy before you go in and start the boss, that is definitely a way to go, and it's probably the best way to do it. And the 30% damage of when arrows when they're active is nothing to shake a stick at by any means. However, if I'm doing a hybrid setup, what I will typically do is use my full arrows for the first rapid fire and following abilities. Then as soon as I go to press Gricko in between the first and the second rapid fire, that is when I'll start to build up when stacks in the middle of a DS, and then just use when arrows for the second rapid fire and following abilities. So here we'll just pretend that I just got done with another ultimate and I happen to be ending at 100% adrenaline, and I need to just build up some death spore arrow stacks to start my DS as soon as possible. And for example's sake, we'll just pretend here that we just got out of an ultimate and we want to get into a death swiftness as fast as possible. And the way I would do that is I would just go ahead and do a piercing shot into a greater ricochet and then another piercing shot, then just start my DS per normal. So DS and then an imbue shadows, go ahead and use my ECB EOF, and then a gale shot with the full arrows, and then press rapid fire. And once that plays out, we'll go ahead and go ahead and hit a bulk spec, a dead shot, and then a snapshot into a dark bow, equip our Wen arrows, and then Gricko, put on our full arrows, hit tendrils and a snapshot, put on the Wen arrows, hit a piercing shot, a gale shot, an ECB, and then a rapid fire. Then I'll go ahead and hit a snapshot, a dark bow, a snapshot, and then a snipe. And something I didn't manage to do in that one, but I will do it in this upcoming example, is when you start your rapid fire, ideally you should be on full arrows when you start your rapid, and then about halfway through is when you swap over to your Wen arrows and start the effect. So that way the entire damage window of Wen arrows lasts all the way through your second half of rapid fire and all of the abilities that you use with the full infused Dracolich buff, or Dracolich infusion buff, I should call it. Because if you're wearing the full 5-piece effect, you're getting essentially 6.6 seconds worth of Dracolich infusion. And I believe if you just camp Wen arrows for the full rapid fire, it won't technically affect the last ability that you use, so that would be a dark bow that you're missing out on. But I'll go ahead and do an example here if I was going to build arrow stacks and then move into a boss accordingly. So we'll just grab some adrenaline here. And then what I would do is click on this dummy and hit Gricko, and then let my character run in and just naturally release the ability, and then hit a piercing shot and then a basic. Swap to my death spores, hit a piercing shot, a basic, and then another Gricko. Now there I got a crackling, which is kind of annoying. Typically that doesn't happen, but if the crackling wasn't there, then I would have been on 11 death spore stacks, and it ends on, I think it's 4 bulg stacks or 5, which it honestly doesn't matter too much, because then what you can do is go into a boss instance, you can start your DS rotation, immediately do imbue shadows, and then you can put on your Wen arrows for the gale shot, just so you can refresh the timer so they last all the way till when you need to activate them in rapid fire. Because some bosses like Nakatra, for example, it's pretty tight timing, and your Wen arrows won't last long enough for you to get from attacking the dummy all the way to your first rapid fire of the boss. It's a little bit longer than 30 seconds. And if I was to go through and actually do a full DS rotation after building up arrow stacks, again, we'll just use this dummy as the example target that we're trying to destroy. It would look something like this. So we'll go ahead and target this dummy and hit a greater ricochet, and then just let it release once we get in. Then our piercing shot, and then our basic. Swap to our death spore and hit another piercing shot into a basic and then a Gricko. And then we'll go ahead and surge in, and then we'll go ahead and pierce it, or basic this dummy, and then just start per usual with death swiftness into an imbue shadows, our ECB EOF, 1 arrow for that gale shot, and then back to full arrows for this rapid. About halfway through, swap to our Wen arrows and then hit a bow with the last guardian spec, a dead shot into a snap, and then a dark bow. Keep your Wen arrows on for this Gricko, then swap to your full arrows for the tendrils and the snap, then Wen arrow for the piercing, ECB, and then gale shot, and then rapid fire. I'm just going to keep my arrows on. That was a mistake, but it is what it is. And then snap into a snipe, into a Gricko, into a dark bow spec. I almost said dead shot again, but that was a dark bow, and that's just another example death swiftness rotation. Now, yes, I did make a mistake there on the second rapid when I'm trying to commentate this live, which this is how I do all of my example rotations. It is all live commentary. This is not a voiceover in any way. I am doing whatever you see on screen in real time. When I'm calling out arrow swaps and the rotation at the same time, trying to explain this while I'm doing it, I will get a little bit mixed up, but it is what it is. You still want to use your full arrow, at least for the first like 3 hits of your rapid, ideally the first 4. But I think we should move on to the last combat style. Now with magic, my rotations have probably changed on this the most compared to the other 2, and that's because before I was using my runic charge with greater sonic wave at the start to get a bunch of adrenaline, but now I end up using it with greater concentrated blast before an omni power more to essentially turbocharge the Omni power and make it do all of the crits and all of the damage. Because if I'm doing hybrid, I typically will save my APOT for mage or for ranged. I am almost never using APOT with berserk, and that's what's really allowed me to go ahead and start using runic charge with Omni power, is again just saving the adrenaline renewal for this style's ultimate, at least in hybrid. If you're style camping with magic, then obviously you're going to be using this with sun, but I digress. And the only non-negotiables really with magic compared to the other styles is Grim and Calg. If you're using melee, ranged, or a combination of the two, you definitely should be using a full scripture and a Ripper Demon. Some rotations that I have done on guides are actually quite requiring of these two. And if a rotation isn't working out as well on, say, melee or ranged, it might be because you are honestly using a Grim and a Calg instead of a full scripture and a Ripper Demon. But again, with magic, you definitely want to be using the Grim and the Calg because this entire style's identity is still based on crits. I think it's quite silly that one combat style can claim critical strikes as its entire identity when magic, I think its true identity is being extremely utilitarian and versatile in pretty much any situation ever. But again, that's another topic for me, just ranting on stream and yelling at the clouds like I usually do over there. By the way, I'm usually live on Twitch pretty much every single day at anywhere from 9 a.m. to noon Eastern Standard Time. Basically just depends on when I'm available, and I usually stream over there a couple hours each day. So if you have questions, feel free to stop by the stream and just ask away. But anyways, you guys are here for the magic rotations. Magic did recently get a slight buff, and at time of recording there are no new buffs as far as like the wild magic one and the asphyx buff. The wild magic buff is nice. It gets some additional critical strike chance and critical strike damage when you use it. Another difference in my rotation is I have just fully stopped using smoke tendrils. This ability feels like you are hitting a boss with a limp wet noodle. It doesn't feel like you're doing any sort of decent damage. It kind of feels like old as Fix did back in the elite tech meta, and honestly I've just avoided this ability entirely because magic is so good on adrenaline anyways that you don't really need to be using it. Honestly, adrenaline, you're gonna be having a ton of it just available pretty much all the time. So personally, I've stopped using smoke tendrils and I haven't really looked back. I'm sure some spreadsheet wizard will try and actually me in the comments, but again, this isn't an ideal picture perfect rotation. These are just rotations that I have been using so far, and they've worked out for me. You guys are more than capable of being creatures of free thought and pulling as little or as much information as you need from these videos to improve your own PVM. Anyways, I digress per usual, but the wild magic is something that I've been focusing on a lot more in rotations and getting more of these out. At time of recording, it's still only this small buff. Maybe in the future we will see something extra get added on, or maybe the other abilities on. The asphyxiate buff doesn't really change anything on the best in slot side of things. If you're not on a full Tumikin setup, you still probably want to channel one of these asphyxiates during your sunshine because it essentially has a mini Tumikins effect baked into it automatically. If I just take off a couple of pieces here, you will see that it applies the channeled might for 3.6 seconds, and it's only a 15% critical strike damage buff. Like I just said, it's a mini Tumikins effect, but if I go ahead and equip my armor set again and let the channeling catch up, now it's back to 9 seconds for a 35% critical strike damage increase. Y'all aren't here for the insane amounts of yapping. You probably just want me to get on to the example sun that I now use. And if I'm doing hybrid, or if I'm going into a boss instance on a style camp, I try to get some type of insight fear stack beforehand, so maybe something like just a literal basic attack, and then just go into a sunshine with the APOT, go ahead and hit G-Conk into a G-Sonic, hit a Nami into an FSOA spec, and then the Asphyx. If you don't get the Adren for Asphyx there, you can just G-Conk beforehand. Then after that plays out, go ahead and Wild Magic, Runic Charge the G-Conk into an Omni Power, and then another Wild Magic. Then I like to hit a G-Conk here, an Ember Staff, then a Wild Magic, then another G-Conk, then another Ember Staff, and go ahead and start the second Asphyx. And then maybe hit like a Wild Magic into a G-Conk Ember and call it good there. Now, on a dummy, you're not going to see the actual full damage from an Ember Staff EOF because it's just, you know, it's a combat dummy. It's always going to be at maximum health. It's not going to be at like 50% or anything like that. And the reason I still use an Ember Staff is 99 out of 100 times I am using a Berserk before I go into a Sunshine rotation. And because melee just clobbers essentially any boss that I do, by the time I get to my Sunshine, it's already low enough for the damage effect that it has based off of your target's HP to then go ahead and take effect and get some pretty good damage, especially considering the Adren cost. Now, if you're an Iban Staff enjoyer, there's nothing wrong with that. You might struggle a little bit on Adrenaline, but I could see it working out just fine if you improv it a little bit. If you're an Armadyl Battle Staff enjoyer, and again, I'm sure some spreadsheet wizard is going to try and actually me and say that ABS is better than Ember Staff and Ember Staff is the worst thing ever designed and yada yada, etc, etc. I'm not going and buying another Armadyl Battle Staff. My EOFs are already full with a bunch of other stuff that I use, and in my opinion, the damage difference between the two is so minimal that it honestly doesn't matter unless you're doing a boss that has such a large HP pool that by the time you get to Sunshine, you can't take advantage of the Ember Staff effect. But to me, it plays just like Iban Staff did, but costs less Adrenaline, and that's basically how I view it. And ever since the FSOA nerf of yesteryear, I haven't really enjoyed ever using an ABS. I still think it's pretty terrible overall. There's some technicalities there on a 3-tick ABS being okay because of channelers, but it is what it is. I'm not going to bother with it. Plus, anyone being hyper serious on the minute damage differences like that with magic probably isn't going to be bringing magic. They're going to be going with range melee anyways, because that's going to be more damage. So it is what it is, but those are the updated rotations that I have been using for the past couple weeks. If any new changes come out, I will just go ahead and make an update on that update specifically. If it's damage number tweaks and nothing in the rotations really changed, then I'm probably not going to make an update video on it, or I might talk about it on stream. Again, my Twitch channel is linked below. Feel free to check out the stream if I'm ever live and ask away questions about PVM and whatnot there. But that's all I really have to say about that.